Hey everybody! So today we're going to continue on with part 4 about how to read a chart, maybe read a chart incorporating the Galactic Center into chart weaving. I'm going to start with my disclaimer. I am not an expert. I do feel like at this point I have a pretty decent handle, pretty somewhat decent handle on how the GC functions from both a scientific point of view and an astrological one, or how to apply it. You know, I'm still just fucking with astrology here, and I very rarely call myself an expert at anything as it is, just because. But it was time to start tossing out some ideas about how to maybe play around with this in chart weaving, actually making videos about this specific thing, not just tossing stuff out there, but actually making ideas about what to look for, what to pay attention to, all of that kind of stuff. So, but again, I reserve the right to find any and or all of this wrong down the line, because I am still just fucking with astrology. So definitely take a look at it. Take a look at what I'm saying in these videos, in these past 3 videos and this one. See if it fits with your own chart, if it fits in the chart of people that you know, other people that you've read for. See if these themes fit. Yeah, that would be my advice. Because fucking around with things is how we learn. So, in the last video, I talked about conjunctions to the Galactic Center, conjunctions to the anti-center, and kind of how to translate or ground via the sextile to the Galactic anti-center, or the trine to the GC. Ways that you could work with that if those don't exist for some reason, if the trine sextile thing doesn't exist in the chart. Obviously, if they do exist, if you do have a trine to the GC, a planet trine the GC, if you have a planet sextile or whatever, the Galactic anti-center, this I feel like should go without saying, but that planet or north or south node or Chiron or major angle needs to be understood very well. Needs to be understood like the back of your fucking hand, because that is the planet or whatever that will be the grounding and will be the translator. If you have multiple planets or whatever there, you have multiple avenues. I do think you have multiple avenues of translating and grounding. Do you necessarily use them all? No, not necessarily. You might, if you've got three planets or whatever there, between 16 Leo and 6 Virgo, or 16 Aries and 6 Taurus, you might have 3 things there. One of those planets or whatever might not make a good translator for whatever reason. This would depend on the whole chart, but 2 of them might. It just opens up, the more trines that you have, the more options for translating options you have to translate, if that makes sense. So definitely know those planets very, very, very well. Planets or whatever very well. Understand them very well in your chart. That would be my advice. Now I want to talk about the people that have both. The people that have both conjunctions to the Galactic Center and conjunctions to the anti-center. Obviously, you have a planet conjunct the Galactic Center. That planet is going to be absorbing that energy, right? It's going to be absorbing the energy from the GC, or getting fed the energy from the GC, things like that. And then you're going to have a planet conjunct the Galactic anti-center that's going to function as a massive attractor, right? That area of the chart is already, I think, like a lightning rod, but having a planet there really makes it an attractive attractor. Though the person that has the conjunction to the Galactic Center and the conjunction to the anti-center, they probably are in some way more aware of the shocking. They are more aware, perhaps, of the issues that could be caused with the planet, what might happen to the planet conjunct the anti-center. And this might not be like in a conscious way necessarily, but I think there probably is more of an awareness if you will. That doesn't make it easy, but necessarily easier. I'm not saying that, but there is an awareness there. I think the person does have an awareness. Now, if there's no, let's say there's no trine or sextile to translate, right? No sextile from the Galactic Center to ground. No trine from the Galactic Center to translate. This is what in my mind, I see like all this energy or whatever at the GC, right? The overflow or whatever shocks the planet at the anticenter, right? And it just kind of shocks it, you know, lights it up. But there's no clear way to translate. So I almost feel like this kind of goes in a loop. I could see it going in a loop, kind of like just going whoop, whoop, whoop. And then eventually when this loop can't keep going on, the whole fucking chart gets shocked. Or if it's not the whole fucking chart that gets shocked, it ends up being like certain parts of the chart get shocked. And this might be kind of a wild card in terms of what gets shocked. It might not really like have any rhyme or reason to it. I could almost see that happening. I could almost see that happening. So if you have both a conjunction to the Galactic Center and a conjunction to the anti-center, and there's no trine to the GC or sextile to the Galactic anti-center to translate or ground, I feel like it is so important. It is so important for you, for this person to understand, again, understand Jupiter and Mercury in your chart. Both of them would be incredibly important to understand. I do feel like trying to function from the retrograde motion of Mercury in the galactic anticenter areas of life by house, and Jupiter retrograde from the galactic center areas of life by house would be best. Trying to do that, but I think you also need to understand how your own natal Mercury and own natal Jupiter function in your chart, regardless if they're direct or retrograde. Or I think that's important because I do feel like that they can end up being a way to ground and a way to translate. I feel like they can. Now, yeah, so definitely take a look at that. If you're looking at a chart that has the conjunction and the conjunction to the anticenter as well, definitely take a look at Jupiter and Mercury, see what they're doing in the chart. Definitely make sense of those yourself if it's your chart you're looking at, or definitely help to make sense of it for somebody else if you're looking at somebody else's chart. Now, for the person that has the trine to the galactic center and the sextile to the galactic anticenter, and they have a planet, and they've got a planet or the north or south node or Chiron or a major angle, conjunct the anticenter and the galactic center, and they've got that trine there. That trine gives them a way to translate things from the galactic center, and it gives them a way to ground things at the anticenter. Again, that doesn't make it easy, but it does give them a way to do that. So if they only have one thing trine the GC and sextile the galactic anticenter, these people need to understand that planet so well. It is so important. I think it is so important. If they've got multiple things trine, they need to understand all of those things. Though I will say, while all of them could technically be translators and grounders, it might not function that way all the time, depending on what else that planet or whatever is doing or is having done to it in the chart. They all might not be good at this. I could see some being good at translating, some being good at grounding, some might really fucking suck ass at all of it. But definitely understand, or even in the most positive cases, some people could have like 3 planets or 3 whatever trine the galactic center and sextile the anti-center, and they all fucking are bomb at doing this. You know, those people might be in a really advantageous position. But definitely know those planets or whatever trine and sextile the galactic center, the galactic anti-center. I think that's very, very, very important. And I mentioned in another video, I do think that probably the planets are the best translators, and Chiron probably the better translators than the north or south node or the angles. That's because Chiron and the planets are actual things in the sky versus the angles and the nodes, which are not. They're, you know, they're not actual tangible bodies in the sky. So if you have, say, like, I don't know, let's say you've got like the north node, trine, the galactic center, and you've got Mars trine the galactic center. Mars would obviously be the one that you'd want to understand more, because it's going to make, I think it's going to make the better translator, probably in the long run. It's going to make a better translator because it's an actual planet. Okay, so there are, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my blog post. I am going to link this blog post to this video. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just click the link. If you are watching it on Instagram, you might actually have to physically type in the link or copy and paste it. Instagram is fucking weird about links. I wish they weren't. But definitely take a look at it, because it might have streamlined all of these videos better than I did verbally. There are other factors to consider. I brought up a lot of things talking about the galactic center. I definitely think Jupiter retrograde has an affinity for the GC energy. I've mentioned that I think that it is a protective force. It is an amplified protector. That would definitely be another factor to consider. Other retrograde planets. I mentioned that I do think that Jupiter retrograde is the planet retrograde that probably has the most affinity for the GC. It just feels like it does. The way that it functions from a retrograde motion does feel very GC-like. But I would also say that people that are retrograde heavy in their charts probably also have they are a little bit more tuned in with the GC. Now, I wouldn't say that just having retrograde planets, being retrograde heavy in your chart, tunes you into the GC, right? If you don't have anything conjunct it, you don't have anything opposing it, it might not tune you in. But if you've got conjunctions in the GC, if you have opposition to the GC, having a retrograde heavy chart probably does help you to tune in. Now, when I say retrograde heavy chart, I am thinking of somebody whose chart ruler is retrograde. I am thinking of somebody who has the planet, let's say they don't have anything conjunct the GC or opposing the GC, but they have a trine. That trine planet is retrograde. In this case, I would think of that as, that's not a traditional retrograde heavy chart, but I would think in this case, I would think the more retrograde inclined from this lens, from the lens of the GC. A traditional retrograde heavy chart is one, in my opinion, and opinions are like assholes, but in my opinion, I think of a retrograde heavy chart as being a chart with either the chart ruler being retrograde or having 3 or more retrograde planets in the chart. To me, that feels more like a retrograde heavy chart, 3 or 4. I guess it kind of also depends on what the planets are, because say like Pluto goes retrograde for 6 months out of the year. So maybe if I saw Pluto retrograde, I'd want to see 3 other planets retrograde. But if we're talking about like a retrograde Mars, Venus, and Saturn, that would be like just needing 3. Does that kind of make sense? It does kind of depend on the chart. But yeah, 3 or 4 planets retrograde, I would consider that to be a retrograde heavy chart. It does feel like if you've got like conjunctions of the GC, oppositions of the GC, and you have a retrograde heavy chart, the retrograde motion does kind of tune you into the GC, but retrograde motion in general, I don't think does. The only one that might is Jupiter retrograde. The only one that might tune you in a little bit more just by virtue of the planet being retrograde, would be Jupiter RX. That's my opinion, though. That's kind of where I am right now with it. I would think of out of balance planets in a similar way that I do retrograde planets. I don't think that they automatically tune you into the GC. I don't think they function like that, but I do think that they can kind of, for people that have planets conjunct the GC, conjunct the anti-center, say you've got Jupiter retrograde, it might tune you in to the GC even more. If you have that planet or whatever, if you got a planet conjunct the GC and it happens to be out of balance, it probably tunes you in even more. Same thing with a retrograde planet conjunct the GC, it probably tunes you in even more. So I would think of them as kind of like amplifiers, if you will. They don't on their own tune you in to the GC, but if you've already got GC shit in your chart, it probably does help to tune you in more. Chiron. Okay, Chiron does feel like it has a vibe, similar vibe to the GC, because Chiron functions like a bridge from the inner to the outer planets. The GC seems to function as a bridge from what is known in our galaxy to what is unknown in another galaxy, another dimension, another realm, whatever. There is a bridge feeling to it as well. Now, when reading a chart from the lens of the GC, I'm on the fence about this because I do think that they have similar energy. I don't know if Chiron necessarily always tunes you into the GC. They have a similar vibe. I'm not sure that they always do. I'm on the fence about that. I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit more because they do have a similar vibe. They feel like they do. They feel like they do in terms of being bridges. But I would say that if somebody has Chiron involved with the GC axis in some way, or it's trying the GC or whatever, or I would even throw Chiron retrograde into this, because I do think the retrograde motion does amplify any GC contacts that you might have, any connection to the GC that you might have. I would definitely take a look, pay attention to that though. I would say in those people's charts, Chiron is very important to understand, for that person to understand. Whether it's conjunct the GC, opposite the GC, trine the GC, it's probably very important to understand, for that person to understand their wound and how to try to heal it. Because they definitely do feel like they have an affinity for it. But again, like the out of balance planets and like the retrograde planets, I'm not sure that on its own it does. Though I was led to, in some of the research from last week, I was led to look at Chiron just being retrograde somewhere in the chart, not necessarily having anything to do with the GC, but being retrograde. There's something about that still feels important. I just have to flesh out exactly what, because Chiron retrograde might be important. Chiron direct might be important with the GC, regardless if it has anything to do with the axis. But right now, I would primarily focus on it having something to do with the GC axis, where I am right now. But if it does have something to do with the GC axis, definitely, that person needs to understand Chiron very well in their chart. I would say that. It's going to be even more important for them to understand it well. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I think that pretty much covered everything in the blog post. So the next video, the last video for this week, I'll be going over a couple examples of charts with GC stuff. One of them will be mine because I know I've got clearance to use my own chart. Hopefully I'll get clearance to use a couple others without using anybody's name or anything, so I can kind of show you with a chart what you can maybe do to, how this shit could play out. But anyway, I'm gonna get going. So if you are watching this on Instagram, if you're watching this on Instagram, you're already following us. If you want to follow us on Instagram, you can follow us on Let's Fuck with Astrology. I am at Saturn Season Astrology on Instagram. Natalie is at Apaturno Astrology on Instagram. If you want to like or subscribe or whatever people do with videos on YouTube, search for us by going to, the YouTube search bar and hitting in Let's Fuck with Astrology. If you do the Reddit thing or interested in the Reddit thing or whatever, come join us on the subreddit Let's Fuck with Astrology. And if you are interested in the star cards, go to letsfuckwithastrology.com/star-cards. I've been talking about the Galactic Center for so long and thinking about it, I clearly can't make sense or talk about anything else. So anyway, I will see you all later.